I have been getting a lot of comments online about me not wanting to vote for Kamala doesn't make any sense.
Two words: lesser evil. Terrible take to pose as a false dilemma. It's her or Trump, and at least she can hold a conversation. What do you want us to do? What, dude? Get over yourself.
My response is I don't care. I'm still not gonna fucking vote. And this is my video explaining why. Hope you're ready to dig in.
Donald Trump, on the other hand, has been talking a big game about securing our border, but he does not walk the walk. Or as my friend Quavo would say, he does not walk it like he talks it.
In this conversation about what leads us emotionally and politically to the reality of our electoral system, our democracy, there's a lot of things. Those things include the hierarchical placement that Blackness has in our country, in our globe. It has to do with all of the needless money in politics and how marketed a system of democracy when actually it requires millions, if not billions of dollars to sway politicians to do what corporations want. Most of us don't even understand U.S. and American history to the point where we can actually describe the complexity of the violence of what the U.S. has done. Can we actually talk about the war on terror? Can we actually talk about Hurricane Katrina, Flint, Michigan, the Trail of Tears, Nazi Germany, and Hitler's concentration camps were based off of things that the U.S. was doing?
The use of disinfection facilities as well as chemicals like Zyklon B would later be adopted by the Nazis.
And when we don't make very critical and specific connections about the cyclical nature of violence in the U.S., we are doomed to repeat it. How many coups we have bolstered, and to claim that we have a democracy and that there's a lesser evil for us to pick. There's also another fallacy built into what we're being asked to participate in. And that fallacy is essentially, in this situation of Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, the lesser evil and the weaker adversary argument. There are two very different political choices that I think are at hand. We can either have a democracy where we actually are voting for candidates based on the fact that we agree with most of their policies, or we are voting because this candidate is not as bad as the other candidate. And for me as an abolitionist, for me as someone that has seen the violence of the US government, of imperialism, of colonization, to vote for the lesser evil is voting for the lesser colonial evil. But it's still fucking evil. If we're being asked election after election after election after election to vote for the lesser evil, vote for the person that's going to be a weaker adversary, when is the actual point that we decide that the government isn't actually there to represent us? It's actually there to control us. And if it's there to control us, we have to figure out how to organize, be militant enough, and create alternative political structures, governmental structures. And the question of how we liberate ourselves is deep, entangled, and it's not something that I can really articulate in this video, but I think there's many different paths forward. There's the path forward where we lean more into liberalism and we eventually have a liberal repressive government that is still shutting down human rights or performing xenophobia, but it's in a more lighthearted or more progressive way. They're changing the language to make it more marketable. Or we can have a conservative government where they lean into more domestic repression, they lean into more xenophobia, ethnocentrism, and that is a more overt fascism that I think people will also militantly have to resist. Or we have the option where organizers, the masses, reach a certain level of consciousness where we choose not to engage in the government or we build viable alternatives. I think all of these things could potentially happen at the same time. But I think the utility of organizing is to continue to experiment now so we can begin to build the structures and processes that can help us get to a better world. And this dichotomy of telling people like, you need to vote for Kamala because like these states, you're telling me to vote for a politician that's going to be harmful to certain kinds of people because they won't be as harmful to you. And when I think about the American individualism, the American exceptionalism in that, I wonder what would our electoral system look like if more Americans voted based on our foreign policy, based on whether or not politicians would actually give humanitarian aid abroad, intervene on genocides, do the conscious political thing on a global level. What would happen if we voted for politicians that were 10 toes down on that? Do we have any politicians that actually represent that kind of approach to war crimes, criminality, violence? A candidate that I would maybe be able to support is one who would maybe be talking about reparations, one that would be talking about of scaling back the number of jails and prison systems, one that would be talking about releasing X amount of prisoners by X amount of time through this very concrete timeline. It would be someone who would maybe understand the social issues related to raising a family in the US. Is there therapy offered to children? Is there more maternity leave? Do we need more protections at work for parents? Should there be more after-school programs? How can you invest in art programs in poor communities? All of these are solutions that we can push for on a grassroots level, and I think we should. The reality that people are expressing with Trump, if Trump gets into office, there's going to be so much repression. People are going to die. People are already dying under Biden. Organizers, activists, Tortuguita, a revolutionary who was unalived by the state, who was unarmed, for protesting. Cop City, for protesting this kind of myth that the Democratic Party is a weaker adversary is only truly there if we're willing to have a militant response, which I think a lot of the people arguing towards Kamala and saying that it's the lesser evil is that crowd ready to organize militantly against Kamala, when I believe she will inevitably fail to call out various forms of police brutality or really stick up for Black people when they're rioting in response. I doubt that she will shut down cop cities or make a really great case against them. I also doubt that she is going to be as progressive on the border as she claims to be, because there's already speeches that said she's going to continue certain aspects of Trump's border policies. And to have a Black woman as a representation of imperialism is a sinister twist and turn. And it's almost like this system locked us out before throughout most of its history, but now that we're allowed in, we're supposed to be buying into it. How many fucking years of this country's history has it locked out someone like me? So why would I want to participate? Why don't I want something better for myself?
My check! I will not vote for candidates that have sent millions of my people to prison. I will not vote for a fake democracy dependent on my son.
No, wait. I agree. If I had sent millions of your people to prison, or she had, that would be good. Hillary didn't vote for the 94 crime bill, even though Senator Sanders did. And neither one of them were trying to send millions of your people to prison because they were in the federal prison system. And she was the first person in this campaign who said we ought to do something to change the incarceration policies. And she would do. No one else has done that. The facts are difficult there.
Once I saw the news about Kamala Harris in Michigan being disrupted by pro-Palestinian protesters, I knew I had to talk about it, because if you dig deep into my YouTube channel's history, you would know that in 2016, I disrupted Bill Clinton's speech when he visited my college town in Athens, Ohio. The news has come out that in a Michigan rally, Kamala Harris was giving a speech and that speech was disrupted. And if you watch the video, Kamala Harris basically does the I'm speaking. If you want another Trump presidency, just say so. I loved when this news came out, because the point of this political disruption is to expose a contradiction. And when the news comes out, it forces people to say, oh yeah, disrupting a boring old political speech makes sense, especially when our government has given millions and millions and millions and speed delivered bombs and other shit to Palestine and built a port and wasn't able to do any kind of real aid for Palestinians. It makes sense that people are so angry that they don't want this event to run as usual. And then there's the people that say, oh my God, they were being rude and she was giving them grace by even being there, and this is not the way to win your issue. How do you stop a genocide when your government is supporting that genocide? How do you win that issue? Arguably, you win that issue by making demands of your government, by making those demands visible. And when those demands aren't met, you righteously oppose operations, processes, the status quo. because disrupting the status quo is necessary to expose to people that your normal isn't the same as someone else's normal, and your normal shouldn't be at the expense of someone else's suffering. Disruptions like this, they also expose a kind of American exceptionalism or a kind of American isolationism, which I think election years always kind of turn me towards. I usually get so angry because instead of people engaging with the full scope of issues, whether it be domestic, international, and that means like how our government can sow violence against us, how our government passes laws and policies that hand monies to the elite, how we have our resources drained from our communities, whether it be health, education, they funnel militarism in our communities. All of these things occur. And when election years roll around, it's always about how can we save ourselves? How can we help ourselves? When if we were to vote based off of analysis of politicians, off of what they're willing to do to other places abroad, what they're willing to do in terms of political intervention, in terms of being complicit or aiding in other genocides, if we just voted off of that alone on a militant and deeply structural level, so many people wouldn't vote for politicians. These disruptions, I think, expose the more militant edge of trying to hold these politicians accountable. And the other side of it is that there were so many different angles and ways that Kamala Harris could have responded. Kamala Harris could have said, hey, why don't you come on stage and let's give you the chance to express yourself. Kamala could have said, this is a complicated issue and I understand your frustration. Since this is the Palestine issue, we have to consider deeply, like, how seriously do we understand Kamala's demand for a ceasefire? Or is it just kind of lip service in the way that liberals and progressives do in order to not totally align themselves with settler colonial genociders? It's like, that's what the U.S. is. But I pulled up an article from the Palestine Chronicle that says, pro-Israel policy, will Kamala Harris continue on Joe Biden's ticket? And this is from just a week ago. And this reads, according to Kamala Harris herself, her connection with Israel began at a young age, stating that having grown up in the San Francisco Bay Area, I fondly remember those Jewish National Fund boxes that we would use to collect donations to plant trees for Israel. The Jewish National Fund's tree planting program works to cover over Palestinian villages that were ethnically cleansed between 1947 and 1949. On top of this, during her passionate speech she delivered in 2017 to AIPAC's Lobby Annual Conference, she praised Israel through and through, even go as far to compare the civil rights movement in the U.S. to the creation of Israel. Harris has been one of the top recipients of funding for pro-Israel lobbying groups, with some tallying up her total donations to be around $5.4 million throughout her political career. Even that, I'm just like, someone please, someone please. I keep saying someone needs to save us, but we need to save ourselves. With all of this in mind, there is the deep question of how will people continue to hold Kamala Harris accountable? How will they speak to the fact that, and I think the way people react to disruptions just really shows their imagination around what is politically possible, one, for themselves, but for other people. If you're against a disruption, you're probably against a riot or a work stoppage, or maybe even people sitting down at counters and protesting integration, because anything that is a disruption of the status quo is seen as not respectable or being too militant or violent or confrontational, when actually, if you look at the US compared to other parts of the world, socially, we try to work with things as they are, which I don't think is how it should always be. And I just really hope moving forward that people continue to do actions like this to expose the many different contradictions at play, and how politicians suddenly, when they're reaching a new level or height or significance, they can be marketed to us in a different way. When I think, what has Kamala Harris said about the fact that Palestinians are being essayed by IOF officers, and there's literally images and video of this that have come out recently. What does Kamala Harris say about the fact that literal tent cities, schools, hospitals have been bombed by Israel, that there are countless war crimes that have been documented? And for us to say we're the greatest democracy in the world, does democracy not intervene when torture, suffering, war crimes happen? I bring up this illusion question because it really is what drove me to disrupt the Bill Clinton speech that I did in 2016. I want to take us back to 2016. This was around the time that I was maybe a year out of college. I lived in Seattle, had a labor organizing job, hated it, left Seattle, went to work a job in Wyoming, experienced all this racism, came back to Ohio, started working an election job. That election job sucked. I was overworked. It was like 50 hours a week. Quit, went to Standing Rock, and I came back. And around this time, Bill Clinton was campaigning for Hillary Clinton because she was running against Trump at the time. And Hillary was never my savior. I remember all of the news and understand and have studied the war on drugs and understand Bill Clinton's complicity. Or not even complicity, Bill Clinton's active hand in the war on drugs and locking up poor black and brown people. There have been drug dealers in my family. There have been men in my family that have gone to jail. And the conditions that the U.S. sows abroad leads to people wanting to immigrate here, leads to people coming here undocumented or not, getting degrees or not, working legal jobs or not. But there is this deeper question of, how does the U.S. account for the structural violence that it sows abroad that eventually comes back to itself? It accounts for this by responding with criminalization, by using these bodies for profit. And this to me is so clear, and it's also emotional. And I have a longer video that I'm going to release about why being against electoralism matters to me on a deeply personal level. And I'm going to talk about all these different experiences in my life that I've had, because I do want this channel to be a very deep political analysis, but I also want us to analyze emotionally and intellectually with how we engage with politics. And growing up with a stepfather that was in prison and experiencing all that stigma and the fear and dealing with all these other things, and growing up in a city where criminalization of black people was just normal, you start to feel like the world doesn't give a fuck what happens to you or people that look like you. So why should you care about the world? But what made me care about the world was, I'm queer, I'm black. I want to be an artist. I want to live. I want to expose things. I want to be honest. And I want my anger to mean something. And so when Bill Clinton was coming to my town and all these people, I was just so fucking angry. And I got a group of my friends together. I remember I asked like 20 people if they wanted to disrupt. Only like 4 people said yes, because everyone else was too scared. And then our plan for the disruption was, we're going to go in, we're going to disrupt in succession. So one person is going to disrupt, get kicked out, wait a little bit, another person is going to disrupt. So there's staggered. You disrupt more of the time and space. We had quarter sheets that we're going to read off of. I was the first one to disrupt. Immediately, people in the audience were like, let Bill speak. I'm a black man in America. Let me speak. And they started walking me out because I was like, okay, I'm not getting handcuffed. And they started walking me out, and I kept yelling as I left. And the thing that is burnt into my head is how many people looked at me in shock or confusion, and how weird it felt, and how I kept thinking, why aren't all of you doing something too? Why does this or something else not matter enough for you to do something too? And I went to a nearby building where I stashed some extra clothes, changed my clothes, went back to the speech. Got in. Staffer grabbed my arm. He's back. Ended up getting kicked out again. Is that the other people I went with didn't disrupt in a way that actually disrupted the event, so they were never asked to leave. Like, they said like, oh yeah, we started chanting a little bit, but nothing really happened. And I'm like, did you yell loud enough? Afterwards, I had people telling me they were worried for my safety. And I was like, worry for my safety? What did I do? Nothing. I had people like sharing it online and like telling me how proud of me they were and blah, blah, blah. I also had people that came up to me like a year or two later and would say, I was there and I was kind of wishing that someone was going to do what you did. And I'm thinking, why didn't you do what I did? Really, really taught me. It was a big moment for me in my personal radicalization journey, because I think it was the first time that I wasn't in an organization or I was also like in a group setting where I pushed the line of what I wanted to be possible because it was personally important to me, and for other people, it wasn't as important in that way. And this isn't to say that the people that didn't disrupt were cowards or whatever. I do feel some type of way about it, but it is what it is. And I think I learned the importance of where I need to stand my ground, and how, because of what I've been through, because of what I know to be true, because of what I know to be true about the violence that this state enacts, this makes sense to me. It might not make sense to you, but it makes sense to me. I grew up in a city where my brother would get stopped all the time driving back from work at like 1 a.m., where you weren't allowed to go into the downtown area because the police at the mall would stop you and wouldn't let you in, where you walk through metal detectors in schools, where you don't walk around with your earphones and your hoodie up because of what happened to Trayvon Martin. And this reality of suffering, I think, is we're marketed the more beautiful version of it, the democracy, every fucking 4 years. But I keep thinking, what about 2020? What about Standing Rock? What about Occupy? What about the student encampments? What about all these movements that are trying to demand a better world? And when a disruption happens, all a politician can do is say, shut the fuck up and stay over there. What does that tell you about the world that we live in, about the political system that we're asked to vote for and participate in? It's about complicity. Saying that I'm proud of my 2016 self for doing what he did then. I'm proud of myself now for continuing this work. I still organize. I'm going to be organizing for the rest of my life. I know that. And I hope that this video, the things I post, that it's not just something that you keep on YouTube in this box that is the internet, that you actually look at your life and you think, what makes me so angry that I'm willing to talk to other people around me and to organize around it and to try to change the material conditions of that. And I think a disruption, it's about exposing the contradiction. And I think the US and our political system asks us to ignore so many contradictions, when those contradictions, if we were to actually look at them, would tell us more about ourselves, about the country that we live in, and what place we have in the world in terms of not being the good guy, not being on the right side of history, not being the utopian democracy that we claim to be.
When we are voting here as US citizens, I wonder what we're actually fighting for. Being able to dictate our playing field, trying to set up the right conditions. But I think the act of investing and voting and believing that the government will give us our rights and believing this narrative around the credibility of a state to determine who is human and who's not.
I would be at a loss if I didn't finish this video by also mentioning that on August 10th, 2024, US approves $20 billion in Israel arms package. The State Department on Tuesday cleared the sale to Israel of dozens of fighter jets and other military equipment worth over $20 billion. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken approved the possible sale of F-15 jets and equipment worth nearly $19 million. The package also includes tank shells worth $774 million and combat vehicles worth $583 million. The tank rounds would almost immediately be delivered. The Boeing F-15 fighter jets would take years to produce and deliver. And I'm going to be as real as possible when I'm saying this. If we're investing in a blue kind of logic or a democratic future, are the Democrats going to oppose this? Because these weapon sales are set to continue years into the future. This is meaning that 2 or 3 or 4 or more years into Kamala Harris's presidency, if she does win, Israel will be funded by the billions of dollars in terms of weapon sales. And this is what I mean. When we're voting for ourselves, we're voting for our rights, when we're voting for the things that we need that are going to help us, that when we're voting to save ourselves, we're also voting to have our tax dollars go towards literal genocide. And if we don't have a praxis around how we plan to oppose this genocide, how we plan to expose weapons companies, Boeing is one of the top 7 contractors with the Pentagon in terms of the aircrafts that it offers them and the weaponry that it offers. It offers kits that adjust missiles and drones and bombs that you would normally have to have like a human being like operating these things. They have kits that can easily adjust these things. So you can just drop bombs anonymously on civilians or what Israel claims to be Hamas. And this is what makes me sick about the whole narrative about vote for the less evil, vote for the weaker adversary. Is this still the weaker adversary for Palestinians, for Congolese people, for people that come from colonized nations that the U.S. is actually actively funding their subjugation? How seriously I take abolition and how it's tied to all of these expanded and intense forms of militarization on a global level. What I ask of the Kamala Harris supporters, of the people that are going to vote blue so we can have better conditions, how the fuck are you going to oppose this? Are you going to be out in the streets protesting? Are you going to be targeting weapons manufacturing companies? Right now, where I live locally in Ohio, the Boeing 5 case is currently happening. In March of this year, a bunch of people went to a weapons facility here in Ohio and they protested. They performed a work stoppage. 5 people were arrested. And those people have dealt with the prosecution, asked them to take down private social media posts. Boeing at one point threatened to charge these defendants with $300,000 in restitution. And this is on top of the fact that Boeing has been a company that has been aligned with Israel literally from the beginning. Google Boeing in Israel and you'll find a PDF of this company bragging about this shit. And these are the kinds of companies that our government, our administration, our politicians are just in the background funneling money towards, yet they want to purport to us that they care about humanism and human rights. We can't just ignore for our own safety or our own idea of a democratic safety, because in the end, they go after them and then they're going to go after us. And it shouldn't even matter if they're going to go after us because they're hurting other people. Our state, our government, the Republican Party, the Democratic Party is hurting people in other nations. And I wonder where our sense of international solidarity is, because I think this is the kind of key that will push people in the US and the West to do more than what they need to do to save themselves under a narrative and a system that has been played out for them again and again and again. $20 billion. $20 billion. What else could that money be spent on?
I hope this video helped people. I definitely see this video as more of a emotional unpacking of these things, more of a articulating certain ideas in my head. I hope the dichotomy, especially between are we voting for political candidates that we actually support on a policy level, or are we voting for someone because the other person seems worse, or that's what we've been marketed. And the difference between that is whether or not you're asking me to make my vote based off of my own authentic political beliefs. And that should be why we're voting, right? No? Okay, cool. See you later.
Thank you for watching another video on my channel. I just wanted to remind people that one way that you can support me in my work is by buying my recent collection of essays called The Black Radical Reader 1. I have a long history of writing creative nonfiction about Black radical figures, about Black solidarity with other movements, and I wanted to combine both of those topics into this book and offer a kind of pocket-sized radical journey. So if you would like to support me in this channel, check out the link in my bio, look up The Black Radical Reader 1, and please consider buying it. It's very cute, it's very pocket-sized. It'll be a good gift for anyone in your life that wants something radical to read.